Brock Otten of McKeen's Hockey joins to discuss Porter Martone and if he should be the pick for the San Jose Sharks.
You're Locked On Sharks, your daily podcast on the San Jose Sharks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to Locked On Sharks, the premier hockey podcast covering your favorite team in the Bay Area. My name is JD Young, caretaker of the Reef, also the co-host of Locked On NHL. I want to thank you for making Locked On Sharks your first listen, proudly part of the Locked On Network. We cover your team every day. And if you want to be an everyday, all you have to do is just follow wherever you get podcasts, or you can watch on YouTube as well. Brock Otten from McKeen's Hockey joins us to discuss Porter Martone and why he could potentially be a great fit for the San Jose Sharks and their rebuild. So we talk about Martone, kind of where he would fit with the Sharks pipeline, his timeline and development. Then Brock joined also to help discuss the 2025 draft and his thoughts. We talk, of course, about the Big Four as well. And if the OHL is back, baby, Brock is very excited. So let's get to it. And now we bring in Brock Otten, Director of Scouting at McKeen's Hockey. Brock, how's it going, buddy?
Good, man. How you doing?
It's, we're getting there. We're almost done. What's been a long season, but a way more fun season for Sharks fans, out especially after last year, where they're going to be the same position of picking in one of the top spots. But the vibes are way better than they were last year at this time. So can't complain. You?
Yeah, I got a 6-month-old at home now. It's been a change, but a good change.
Next thing you know, buddy, they're 11 years old and they start growing mustache. They got the mustache fuzz starting to come in because my oldest, it's starting to come in a little bit, and it's just boom, it happens really fast.
Well, next thing you know, you're teaching them how to shave, right?
I know. I'm worried about that. He's scared to use a knife, so shaving is going to be really fun when we get there. So, but we're not talking about someone. I hope Porter Martone knows how to shave. That would be an interesting thing if he didn't know how to shave, but he doesn't need to. He could just pay somebody soon. But we're going to be talking Porter Martone. But before we get to Martone, as an OHL guy, is the OHL back, Brock? With 3 potential OHL guys getting picked in the top 4, is the OHL back?
The OHL's back. Yeah, I think it's safe to say there was a few years. I want to say a bit of like a post-COVID lag, and I think that had a lot to do with how minor hockey was disrupted in Ontario, and I think we're seeing the return of development in the province. So it's great that the OHL has a very strong contingent for this draft, because somebody's got to, because it's a bit of a down year for some other regions. So if it weren't for this Ontario crop, it would be even more of a down year.
Yeah, I have been watching a lot of OHL between the prospects, all the Sharks prospects that are in the OHL with Igor Chernyshov, Kasper Halttunen, Sam Dickinson, Quentin Mustard. There's a bajillion read. Yeah, the OHL's been really fun this year. So let's talk though one guy who's a big story in the OHL, and that is Porter Martone. So if you don't know who Mr. Martone is, he's a forward with Brampton. Big boy is 6'3", 208 pounds, right-handed shot. In 51 games this year, he has 30 goals, 59 assists, and 163 shots on goal. And yes, we're in the C as a draft-eligible player. So let's start, as I always start, what makes Martone such an intriguing player in this year's draft?
Well, you're hoping that he can be, a third Tkachuk brother, essentially, right? Like that's what you're drafting Porter Martone for. You're hoping that he can have a similar kind of impact in your lineup the way that Brady and Matthew do in the NHL. And that's as a really solid top 6 overall contributor who plays sort of a playoff brand of hockey. And that's the allure here, right? This is a guy that plays a power forward kind of game that also brings skill to the table. And he's somebody that can play big minutes in any situation, hopefully, and be an offensive leader for his team in a way that is kind of a little bit more rare in today's NHL, right? There aren't a lot of guys like the Tkachuk brothers, like Tom Wilson in the NHL these days. And that's why Martone is somebody who I would say is almost a virtual lock for the top 5.
It makes sense, right? And we'll talk more about the kind of the big 4 here in a little bit. But if you're the Sharks, right, you've drafted mostly kind of smaller wing or forwards, right? You have Will Smith, who I know you were very, very high on Will Smith, and he's really started to kind of blossom here over kind of the second half of the season. William Macklin, who's a little bit smaller guy. I know Macklin Celebrini, not the biggest guy, but he plays much bigger. That kid is a bully at 18. But you do have some bigger guys in the system like Quentin Musty. Maybe he needs to work on his physicality. Casper Olsen, who is a big guy who can use his physicality. Igor Chernyshov. So, would Martone just continue to add to that blend of, hey, we might have Will Smith, who's 5'9" or 5'11" and doesn't play much physical, but if we put a Porter Martone with him, who could just be an absolute bully and let Will Smith go do fun things like that and let those two guys, is that kind of the hope for him?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think you hope that he can kind of create some space for some of the higher skill guys that the Sharks have. And you have some good options, right? You could play him beside Celebrini, create sort of a powerful duo. And then you could also play him beside Will Smith in hopes that he's creating a little bit more space and time for Will and can get to the net and work the corners, get pucks to Will as well. So I think you've got a lot of options if the Sharks were to go that route. I think it's sort of the perfect complement for some of the players that they have in there. Because you did mention some bigger bodies, but none of them play a really, really obvious power game the way that Martone does.
All right. So what do you think is going to be? I mean, you've talked about the power game with Martone, but what do you think is going to be his kind of one calling card aspect for his game? Is it like his playmaking, his scoring? I mean, we know the physicality, but what do you think is going to be the thing that really helps him drive him to be a top 5 pick and to kind of be a high end NHL player?
Yeah, that's a kind of a tricky question. And it's kind of why Martone is such an intriguing option, is because his game is very well-rounded as an offensive player. I think there are some other shortcomings that I'm sure we'll get into, but as an offensive player, this is a high skill guy. This is a guy that flashes high in playmaking ability. He's got a great shot. He can score in a multitude of different ways. I think he probably slots in best as a complementary piece at the NHL level, which is going to be perfect. You don't have to be an elite play driver to be an consistent 80-point player or close to a point per game player in the NHL. You don't have to. And I think his calling card is going to be the fact that he can create space, but has enough skill and sense to play with higher skill players, because we know that can be a bit of a challenge, right? Look how long it took the Oilers to find someone to be able to play with Connor McDavid, right? Jake Gensel slotting beside Crosby for so long, right? It's a skill in its own to be a quality complement to higher end players who need the puck. And I don't know if Martone is going to be one of those players who needs the puck on his stick to be a point producer and a successful NHL player. And that in its own, I think, is a calling card, right? Somebody who can bring physicality, but can finish off plays at a high level. You mentioned
he feels like a playoff type of player, right? I know the Sharks are several years from being a playoff type of team, but it's not too early to think about it, especially when you feel like you've done the hard part for the Sharks, right? And finding Macklin Celebrini. You found your superstar player to build around. And I think he has exceeded, I've said it before, he's exceeded my expectations. I think he's exceeded most people's expectations as an 18-year-old. But right now you're just trying to build around him the best way you can. And if you're the Sharks, I know it's always you want to pick best player available, especially when you're picking this top, but a guy like Martone, where you feel like he can naturally fit into what they're trying to build, if you're Mike Green, you have to think about it, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think naturally Mike might be drawn to the way that Martone plays because, he had some similar attributes, maybe not at the same offensive level, but had similar attributes as a physical guy who brought high energy and tenacity to the ice. So I think there's going to be an appreciation there. And I think it all comes down to where San Jose is picking, right? If they're picking third, And, it's a choice between maybe Haggins, Misa, and Martone. Obviously, one of those probably off the board, but
yeah,
I think that's kind of the way that they might lean. I think you're right. I think that there's definitely something to be said about the way that they're building their team and the need maybe for a player like Martone to take them to that next level. And especially, in the conference and the division that they play in, somebody like Martone is going to be needed, maybe more so than a guy like James Higgins, who really is he all that different from a guy like Will Smith? I think in some ways, yes.
yeah.
Personally, I think I would prefer James is potential maybe a little bit more than Will, and that's no slight to Will. Higgins has been on the draft radar for a long time as a high-end skill guy, but I don't know if that's a true fit, right? You've got a lot of similar kind of players in San Jose system right now, and Martone definitely, not only is he a candidate to be just the overall best player available, like you said, that classic BPA strategy, which is always, in my opinion, the best one when you're picking inside the top 10 at the very least. But he also, in my opinion, is maybe the best fit outside of maybe Matthew Schaefer.
Oh, we're talking Schaefer here a little bit, but all right. Before we continue with Brock, we get into Martone's timeline and development, all that fun stuff. Just need to take a quick break. Looking to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor makes eating well easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences every week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto Plus. Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfasts, grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled all day long. I love how Factor takes the stress out of meal planning. I hate meal planning. You got to figure out what you're going to eat all week. You got to go to the store and buy it, and then you got to make all this stuff. The convenience with Factor is unbeatable. No prep, no mess. Just get food in minutes. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 off and use code LockedOnNHL50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code LockedOnNHL50 off at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Development. So you mentioned some, like, we focus very much on the offensive side of the game, and you mentioned some of his areas that he needs to, or you alluded to some of the areas he needs to work on. So again, like, he's a right wing. We don't need him to play like stellar shutdown defense, but I assume that's probably the area he needs to work on, is playing in his own defensive zone. Or what do you think he kind of needs to focus on?
Yeah, it's more so the consistency of it. Like, for a guy who plays a true power game, the off the puck play is sort of inconsistent. Like, especially when you're talking about neutral zone and defensive zone play. Like, he's flashed an ability to be a high end penalty killer and a really good defensive player. And there's other times and other shifts where that's just not the case. So I think it's just finding that consistency, whether that means just improved conditioning, to be sort of that impact physical player all the time. I think that's why these kinds of guys, these bigger power forwards, do take a little bit longer to develop their true overall complete game, because they have to be extremely well conditioned to play that sort of in your face style all the time, every time they step on the ice, every shift. Right. And I think that's going to be the key for Martone. The other one would be just improving his skating. Martone is never going to be a high end skater at the NHL level. And it's not a weakness. This is kind of nitpicking a little bit. I think he skates fine for the kind of game that he plays, but I think there are some limitations there. And I think that's part of why I don't necessarily see him as a primary play driver at the NHL level, because he doesn't have that high end skating ability to combine with, his power. I think it'll play a little bit less than it does at the OHL level currently. So he's going to have to adjust. And I think he's definitely capable of it. Like I said, I think he's going to end up being that really high-end complement to other skill players.
All right, and again, when you have a Macklin Celebrini who you feel like can drive a line, and Will Smith, who whether he's a winger or a center, that's going to be a conversation for a different day. But you feel like Will Smith is well on his way to be a potential line driver. They don't all have to be able to drive a line, and William Macklin, who feels like he can drive a line or be a complementary player, like we've seen that from him. Again, they all don't have to be able to be line drivers. That when you have other pieces around, but wearing the C, like, as an 18-year-old, that's kind of a big thing. And we know, of course, the Sharks, they do like to get these guys who are captains or, guys who have been wearing letters and stuff. I know like Carson Wetch, who a 3rd-round pick wearing the C for the Calgary Hitmen. Like, that's a big deal to be that young and wearing the C for this team, right?
Yeah, it's also important to note that he's in his 3rd year in the league. He is a late birthday, right? So not to take away from the accomplishment of being named captain at a younger age. But it is important to note that late birthday. So it does kind of put a bit of an asterisk beside it. But he is a guy that, has the capability of being a leader at the next level as well. I think the one thing that scouts are really going to be looking for from Martone as we sort of close out this OHL season and into the playoffs, is his performance and ability to lead this team to playoff success. Brampton hasn't had the kind of season that people expected. They made a lot of trades. They brought in players. They were expected to be maybe the very best team in the OHL this year, and they haven't been.
London keeps doing it again. How do they get away with it?
Yeah, that's it, man. They just keep the train rolling, and and the fact that other teams in the Eastern Conference have stepped up and passed Brampton, I think part of that lays on Martone and being a little bit more consistent, and not just him, but other members of that team. Consistency has been an issue. Injuries have also played a very big role in Brampton. Their defense has been mangled all year, and but excuses only get you so far, right? They've got the talent. They should be playing at a higher level, and they have been lately. They've been playing much better hockey the last month, and this is very encouraging heading into the OHL playoffs. But that's going to be the focus. Scouts are going to be looking at him as a 3rd-year player in the league, wearing the C on a team that's underperformed all year. Can he take them to the Eastern Conference final, semifinal at the very minimum? I would say that as long as his performance is very strong, I think that he's got nothing to worry about. But let's hypothetically say that they lose in round 1, right? And there's an upset, and Martone doesn't have a great series. Are scouts now going to question his ability a little bit, right? Like compared to some other guys that are available in that range. You've got another power type of player in Caleb Desnoyers. And if he has an outstanding QMJHL playoffs, maybe that's a guy that enters into the conversation for NHL scouts being like, this guy is not a late birthday. He's only in his 2nd year in the queue and is a player that was able to step up when he was needed, played a similar kind of power game from the center position as well. Maybe he enters into that conversation. And I think there's other guys, Roger McKeen, now that he's back playing again, same thing. If he finishes out the WHL season on a real high, maybe doesn't do very well in the playoffs, but then goes to I guess, he's a late birthday as well. So he would be at the U18s, but basically there are other guys that can enter into that conversation is what I'm trying to say. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on him. And I think rightfully so. So I'm very, very interested to see how Brampton plays in the OHL playoffs this year and to see how some of their veteran players like Martone step up.
Yeah. I mean, if you're touting him as a playoff type of guy, is going to help you in the playoff situations. He doesn't play well in the playoffs it doesn't give you a good feeling, warm and fuzzy feeling going forward. So, one thing though, with the late birthday, right, as you mentioned, right, this is his 3rd season with the CHL NHL agreement, right? You could play 4 seasons before you go and play in the AHL. So that could be for a team. Maybe you like that aspect of he only needs 1 more season in the O before he plays in the A, and you're not stuck with a Quentin Musty type of situation where he's stuck, right? Not good enough to play in the NHL, but he's way too good to be playing in the OHL. But Then again, who knows what now with the NCAA rules, if like sending him off to college for a season, like there's so many fun options with him. But I am curious to see, like with his development, you mentioned these power forward guys do take a little bit longer. What do you kind of consider the best route if you were his advisor? Like try to get to the A, spend a year in college after your next OHL, like kind of what would you advise for him as the best path forward?
Yeah, I think that's to be determined. I think it depends on how he finishes out this year. I think if there is an underperforming element to close out the year, I think returning to the O or looking at going to a high-end NCAA program, a place like Denver would be a perfect fit for Martone with the way that he plays. They've had a lot of success with similar kinds of players, and they're obviously a top shelf program. Somewhere like that would be great for him to develop. But who knows how things develop this offseason as well with the agreement. Like you said, there's been a lot of chatter about the changing of some of those rules with everything that's happening in the changing landscape of NCAA versus CHL rules and stipulations, right? So I don't know if we can truly answer that question yet. I think that he's a guy that could also spend a really good chunk of the offseason improving his skating, improving his pace, getting stronger, and being able to make the NHL next year. I don't know if there's a guy that's truly NHL ready in this draft class. Schaefer, I think, has the mind and the skating for it, but with the injury this year, and I think a team will probably be cautious in sending him back for another season. But Martone is probably maybe among the most physically ready for that challenge. So if he has a really good offseason, right, he's somebody that could come into a camp and push for a roster spot, knowing that a team could ease him in, right? They could play him in the bottom six, play him on the secondary power play unit. And he's a guy that isn't going to hurt you and probably does more good than harm for your team. And it would be good for his development as well. But that's only if, he has a really good camp, right? You've got so many different options. And that's the exciting thing about covering prospects and covering the draft, right? It's hard to truly look into that crystal ball and prognosticate year from year.
All right, before we continue with Brock and we talk about the 2025 draft, he talks about Matthew Schaefer, why it's Schaefer and nobody else at the number one pick. Do need to take a quick break. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. I personally love the shelled in variety. I love hearing the little crack, eating it. I also build little forts with the shells, but they also have no shell variety, which makes it super easy to eat. A bunch of amazing flavors, and each one provides 9 essential amino acids. So get snacking, get cracking with the snack that provides a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, let's switch gears here and talk about the 2025 draft. So you kind of mentioned the big four, right? You have Schaefer, you have Misa, you have Haggin, you have Martone. You have some guys who are, kind of on the outside, but let's focus on this big four here. Let's start by asking, how do you have those 4 guys ranked?
It would be Schaefer, Misa, and then a tie between Haggin and Martone.
The cop out.
I know. Sorry. I had to. That's just that's how I see it. I think that those two are sort of neck and neck. They're so different, polarizing players. But I truly want to see how Higgins finishes out his NCAA year. How does he perform in the playoffs? Right in the Frozen Four, like how do they do, and then how does Martone do in the OHL playoffs? Right, there's a lot of things that I want to see how both of these guys finish out the year.
All right. I'm going to ask, give me your elevator pitch on Schaefer. I know a lot of Sharks fans, myself included, feel very much like if you can get Schaefer to add to Sam Dickinson, who they drafted last year, you feel like Schaefer could kind of be that nice cherry on top of this prospect pool. So give me your elevator pitch on Schaefer.
The pitch is that it doesn't matter what your defensive depth from a prospect perspective looks like. He's the kind of guy that's worth selecting regardless, right? This is a potential number one franchise defender, a difference maker, a Drew Doughty, a Cale Makar, a guy that's going to come in and potentially be the franchise cornerstone on the blue line. And that's not saying a guy like Dickinson can't, but Schaefer's game is just that little bit elevated in every aspect, right? A little bit smarter, definitely a little bit better skater. That's tough to say because Dickinson is a great skater. But Schaefer, we're talking about a guy that would be a potential top 5 skating blue liner in the entire NHL when all is said and done. He's that good. And a terrific leader, somebody who's a born natural leader. If you have the chance to talk to Matthew, if you guys do end up selecting him, I know that you guys will be incredibly impressed with how mature this young man is. In my opinion, honestly, I've had a chance to talk to Matthew a couple times, and he is one of the most mature and well-spoken and confident young players that I've had the chance to speak to in my years of covering the OHL. I think that highly of him. And I think that speaks volumes as to the way that he's going to mature as a player too, right? He's the type of guy that always seems to improve and be up to challenges. You look at always a bit of an adjustment period, but within a small sample size, he elevates his game and is performing at a high level. You look at him playing at the U18s as an underager previously, and he started that tournament in sort of a lower role. And then by the end of that tournament, he was Canada's best defenseman, in my opinion. You look at the World Juniors this year before he got hurt, right? Like this is a draft eligible defender. One of, not just that, but one of the youngest players eligible in this draft. And he comes in and is immediately Canada's best defender. Maybe that says something about Canada's depth on the blue line this year also, which we're not going to get into.
There's been plenty of hours on Canada's World Juniors. yes.
But bottom line is, this is just somebody that I think can turn a franchise around. I think that highly of him. And even if maybe he doesn't reach that high a level, he's still somebody who's going to be a 23, 24 minute a night guy, second, third defender who can play on the power play, who can play on the penalty kill, all situations. And that's if the offensive game maybe doesn't translate quite as well as you hope, but I think it will. I think that this is a guy that you just can't turn down. If you're picking number one, I think it has to be Matthew Schaefer at this point.
I mean, if Schaefer and then Sam Dickinson's your second best defense, you feel pretty good about where your defense is heading. So Michael Misa, a lot of fans, right? We have seen Igor Chernyshov, as I've nicknamed the Fireworks Factory, because we waited to get to the Fireworks Factory, and now he's exploding with awesome stuff. We've seen these two have instant chemistry. The prospect of adding Misa behind Macklin, Celebrini, pretty exciting too. If Schaefer's not your dude, or somebody gets ahead of you, give me the Misa.
Yeah, I think he'd be interesting for San Jose. I mean, if you're drafting Misa, you'll have to take Christian Epperson as well, right? Like you just have to
bring them all.
Second, third round, whatever. You got that full line that you're now taking with you. But I think what is so impressive with Misa is that he plays the game at a blistering pace, but he understands how to control that pace. And that is something that is very rare, I think, in younger players. You're either all go all the time because you have that skating ability, or you like to slow the pace because you're more cerebral. He's somebody that can do both. And I think that the high skill, high skating ability, the high sense is going to play really, really well at the NHL level. And he's having just such a phenomenal year. Excelling in pretty much every situation that's asked of him, right? Saginaw uses him for absolutely every situation.
He plays so much for Saginaw. I feel like he's double shifted constantly.
That's honestly pretty much the case, right? And he also has shown an ability to play all four positions, basically. So you have some versatility there. I think he can play center at the NHL level, but if a team like San Jose drafts him, they could easily push him to the wing and have him play there using his speed alongside a guy like Macklin Celebrini, right? So I think that there's options with a guy like Misa. I think that his his well-rounded profile is going to continue to become even more well-rounded as a pro as he sort of fills out a little bit. Because I think one thing that people sort of forget about Michael Misa is that, and maybe it's because there's this sort of natural comparison with James Haggins, whereas Haggins is like pushing 5'11". He's kind of like a 5'10 and a half kind of guy. I think people kind of assume, just based on his high skill game, that Misa is like another like 5'10 and a half guy.
What? Yeah.
This is a guy that's probably going to end up being like 6'1", like 195, 200 by the time, he's hitting his stride or, his prime in the NHL.
His big boy body comes in. That's
right. Yeah. I like that. But I think people sort of forget about that. This is a guy that can play a lot of different ways and has a pro frame. And that's going to be really alluring for NHL teams, NHL scouts to sort of build their team around. I think that he's an all situations guy. And I think he'll be hard to turn down. And I think that's why he sort of moved ahead of Haggins for me. And that's not to say that Haggins has had a poor year. I think that he maybe hasn't driven play at the NCAA level the way that I kind of expected him to. And maybe that's unfair given that the role he's kind of slid into, where he was kind of replacing Will Smith to an extent, and then playing with other high-end skill guys that have more experience at the NCAA level. So they've kind of taken on that role and pushed Haggins to be more of a complement, which is weird to say as a pivot. But if you watch them play, it does kind of feel like he is secondary. And I think that sort of left me with some questions about whether, has he plateaued? Is this a guy that, hit a high level at a younger age and now has sort of flattened out a little bit? I don't think that's the case, but I'd be lying if I hadn't thought about it. I think you saw his performance at the World Juniors and you saw what he's fully capable of. But I just prefer Misa's frame a little bit more. And I think his game has the potential. I think right now they're probably even in terms of off puck play. But I think Misa has the potential to be a better defensive player just because he has that frame and a little bit more electricity, we'll call it, with his skating abilities, a little bit more of a dynamic skater. So you have that frame and that skating ability, which I think can make him a better defensive option at the NHL level.
All right, we'll get you out of here on this. Who's the one guy in the 2025 draft that isn't getting talked about enough?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm going to give you two names. I know that's a cop-out, but I didn't think you mind me giving you two names.
That's
the first one. The first one's Brady Martin, and I know that's a bias with me being in the OHL, but I think that
shocker, Brock picking it. I'm just kidding.
I'm sorry, I'm out.
Have you ever watched OHL? Anything other than OHL? There's a WHL.
What's that, man? I don't know. I've never heard of that before. They play hockey outside of Ontario.
Brady Martin.
Yeah. Anyway, this is a guy that just plays the way that I like, right? Like, he's not a dynamic skater, and he probably never will be. But he does everything else well. I think you look at him being a Mike Richards, Ryan O'Reilly type at the NHL level, somebody who's going to be your second line anchor for a long time that can play a lot of different roles for you. He can anchor your penalty kill. I think he's going to be able to be on the ice late in games to protect leads. I think he's going to be a solid point producer, maybe not like a point per game guy, but again, solid second line anchor who can be 50, 60 a year, playing in all situations, bringing physicality, tough on the forecheck, tough on the back check. He does everything well except for skating. There are some people I know, I've talked to some people, different scouts, who wonder about the hockey sense, but I think that's maybe comes with the Sioux not having a ton of talent around him right now, and him trying to just do too much. I think there's some refinement that's required in his offensive game and the way that he sees the ice, but I think that will come. I think we've seen that internationally when he's been asked to play sort of a different role. I think we've seen him slide into that role, and I think that speaks volumes as to having a higher and hockey sense if you can adapt your game to different asks of coaches. So he's the first one. And the other one I'll give you is Jackson Smith, out of that weird, mysterious WHL that I didn't know. Yeah, I don't know, whatever that is. But this is a guy I think is flying under the radar as, in my opinion, the second best defenseman available in this draft class. Somebody who oozes athletic skill. I think that he's sort of scratching the surface of what he's capable of. I don't think he understands what his body is capable of currently. He's a really, really high-end skater in that frame that he has. He's a big boy, and I think once he fills out, we're looking at a guy that could be a really, really good two-way NHL defender. And in a draft that I don't think has a ton of these types, I'm kind of shocked that we're not seeing him push maybe into that conversation with, Martone and Caleb Desnoyers and Roger McKeen and some other players in that 5 to 7 or 8 range. I think we're starting to see it now. It's been a slow sort of movement, if you will, but I think by the time the draft rolls around, I think he sort of ends up being the consensus second best defenseman available behind Schaefer.
Brock, you said it all. Where can the people find you, and what do you got else? What do you got coming out soon?
Yeah, people can find me on X at Brock Otten. Yeah, there's a movement there for sure, but that's where they can find me for now. You've got my own work at OHL Prospects. You've got all the great stuff we do at McKeen's. We're going to be updating our draft board very, very soon. We're kind of in the process of doing that. It should be ready within the next week or week and a half. We've kind of got our board almost set. Now it's just about meeting with our staff and sort of, making some fine tuning. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. It'll be a top 100. We expand to a top 100 in March before we finalize our draft list in May and June. So you can look for that in the coming week or so.
All right, Brock, always a pleasure. We'll talk again soon, buddy.
Thanks, JD. See ya.
All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed my conversation with Brock about Porter Martone. If the Sharks don't get one of those top 2 picks, I still think it's Schaefer, Misa as of right now for San Jose. But at number 3, you could really talk me into Martone because, again, kind of adding another big scoring winger that the Sharks do not have in Martone. I think you could really talk me into that as well over Haggins. But still, we have plenty of time to kind of get there and see what happens. So thank you, of course, to Brock for spending some time. We'll have Brock back on at some point during the offseason as we continue to gear up for the draft. So make sure you are following along wherever you get podcasts. And of course, you can watch on YouTube as well. We'll be back tomorrow to talk about the Sharks Preds game. Of course, we'll have a 10-minute YouTube exclusive Preds preview going up around probably after lunch. 2 o'clock Pacific time is probably a good time to look for that. So we'll get you ready for that game as well. So make sure you follow along wherever you get podcasts, watch on YouTube. You can follow the show on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Locked On Sharks. Follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at My Fry Hole. Until tomorrow. Bye, friends.